To start, and for everyone who's new here, we are going to first set the scene by revisiting the city of Lviv, which I hope I am pronouncing correctly. So Lviv was historically known as Wow when it was Polish, and then Lemberg when it was German. So before World War II, Lviv was known as a cultural and intellectual hub in Eastern Europe, with a diverse population, notably Ukrainians, Poles, and Jews. Why Lviv is significant for the origins of my research. That is because of two key legal minds who are connected to the city and the way we shape and understand mass atrocity today. So the first is Raphael Lemkin, and the second is Lauterpacht. Now, Lemkin is known for coining the term genocide, and Lauterpacht is known for promoting the concept of crimes against humanity. He did not invent the term, but he did promote its use. Both men pushed for the inclusion of these two terms into international law through the Nuremberg Tribunal and then Charter. However, only one man succeeded. So intense lobbying, specifically from the US Chief Prosecutor Robert Jackson, led to crimes against humanity making it into the tribunal and the charter, but genocide was never mentioned. Why is that? Because we all consider the Holocaust a genocide, but technically it was never referred to as one in the tribunal and the charter. So this is because the US and the UK feared that recognizing genocide at such a large scale in international law would create an uncomfortable comparison to their colonial pasts and presents. So this was a turning point for me for international law because political manipulation gets in the way of justice. So the research question that guides the study is then how do cultural and political factors influence the classification of mass atrocities as genocide or other forms of collective violence by international institutions? The objectives of my study are very simple, in my opinion. They are to discuss and determine the evolution of genocide as a concept and related scholarly debates, to explore how culture shapes the classification of mass atrocity, to assess why some events are labeled as genocide and others are not, and then to analyze the role of states and political actors in the shaping of these classifications. Okay, now the literature review. So the key areas of my literature review are these thus far. There is a lot of room for this to be expanded, but that's still in progress. So the first is the definitional foundations, which is quite important in this study because there are a lot of legal terms that are being used and conventions. So this section focuses on the historical evolution of genocide from Lemkin's definition. So the next slide shows that when Lemkin was formulating the concept of genocide, he broke it up into two words. So genocide comes from the Greek word genos, which means tribe, and then the Latin word side, which I feel like we all know means to kill or kill. So this shows that for Lemkin, culture was central to the concept of genocide. I mean, genos is tribe. It wasn't just a random mass killing for him. And then according to the literature, cultural genocide refers to the weakening and ultimate destruction of cultural values and practices of feared outgroups. And this phenomenon is characterized by an us versus them mentality. The actual definition of genocide, which is codified in the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, states that genocide means any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group, as such, killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction, in whole or in part, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group, and forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. So the definition that's in international law is very heavily focused on the physical and biological aspects of genocide, but not the cultural. So now we move on to the theoretical framework of the study, which takes on three separate approaches. The first is constructivism. So constructivism argues that norms and definitions are socially constructed. Thus, this research uses constructivism to understand the formation of norms within global politics and determine how global norms have contributed to the defining of genocide. Then we will use, postcolonial theory, which will be used to critique the Western biases in law and justice. This framework asks why colonial and indigenous experiences are often excluded. Specifically, the research will draw on scholars like Homi Bhabha and Edward Said, who show how colonial systems have constructed the other and how these voices are often excluded from legal and historical narrative. And then finally, I will use critical discourse analysis to look at how language reflects power. When states reject the word genocide, it is often hidden behind legal jargon and euphemisms, but behind language are always political motives. The framework of CDA helps to unpack the subtle ways in which power is wielded through an analysis of speeches, reports, and resolutions.